now I guess we can talk about what we do about this mess. Yeah, I see hands. So let's start with lady in the light here, because I'm very partial to ladies in the light here.
Yeah. I want to know exactly, specifically, what we can do.
Well, we all have different ideas, but just in casual conversations that I've had with people here and with others, I think what I'm hearing is that somebody asked me, what's the answer? And the answer is us.
What? Yeah.
The answer is us. We are the answer.
Yes. What does us do?
Us needs to get together. Us needs to get out of our silos. We have people who are all about LGBTQ rights, who are all about housing, who are all about the environment, who are all about healthcare. I could go on, the list is pretty much endless, but the point is that we've all been in our silos, and we throw rocks at each other. And we don't want to work together because you don't support my silo and I may not support your silo. That stuff's got to stop because we face an existential threat to all of our silos. And my husband pointed out today when we were talking about this, it's real easy to throw rocks at each other's silos because, you're going to get rocks back, but who cares? Nobody's going to cut your thumb, nobody's going to arrest you, nobody's going to deport you, nobody's going to sue you. It doesn't matter. We can go back to our silos and throw rocks at each other after we get rid of Trump. And that,
I think this group is not in their own silos, throwing rocks at one another. I don't know what I can do, if there's a group I can join that's doing something.
well, there's indivisible, it's wonderful. I had kind of hoped that the people here might get on a list, share their email addresses with each other or other contact information, and we could be the seed of a group. Cynthia's handing something out. Thank you, Cynthia.
That's what you can do, I can get involved.
Okay.
And if you don't need it, you can give it to other people concerned, we can take action. Anybody wants them?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. The important thing to remember is if we band together as a group, then each of us doesn't have to respond to every problem. You can choose what you want to focus on, what you want to write to your congressman about, what you want to write to the White House about, what do you want to make phone calls about, what do you get active about, and rely on other people to tend their fires, because it's too exhausting for each one of us individually to be reacting to every atrocity that comes out of the White House. I think Andy wants to say something.
Okay, let me follow up your excellent point and Deborah's excellent response with a message indirectly from me from one of the leading, most effective theoreticians in the country who has practical advice in response to your question. Now, that man is the Reverend William Bartley. Here. So, as you know, he, after receiving, got his name by him, but he was very effective in North Carolina before the system was kind of rigged, undermining effective action. And I got to know him going to the what called the Pettus Ridge annual gathering in Alabama, marking the anniversary of the civil rights march across the Pettus Ridge. And I used to go there because I knew whistleblowers who were involved in the total destruction of the Democratic Party there by framing leading Democrats and getting them sentenced to prison on phony federal charges that were based on perjury and so forth. And one was the governor, a very popular Democrat, Don Siegelman. And one of the people working with Carl Rove, who helped frame him with the help of federal authorities, became a whistleblower, and I probably spent 200 hours talking to her about how these prosecutions of Democrats and dossiers to frame innocent people, take them out of politics, or in the case of Republicans, create dossiers to blackmail them so that the decisions and rulings are in favor of the people who have dossiers. So anyway, to get to the point, I used to go down to this festival, and I get to know William Barber, Reverend Barber there. And here is his advice to people trying to start an Alabama chapter based on the success of North Carolina. And his advice was very simple. It builds on what Deborah is saying. And it's what ordinary people, ordinary citizens, particularly if you're elected or active, can do. And he said, don't just advocate for your own interests. Have your group, and you can be part of a group. People in Washington and other government advocacy know this. If you're just an individual, it's very easy for senators and others to, maybe not state senators, other senators to ignore you. So you got to have a group. If you're a veteran, you're a police officer, you're a teacher, influence your group so that you have a unified position with the elected officials, the public, the media. But here's what we're added to them. If your teachers don't just advocate for better pay for teachers, better treatment of students, form an alliance with another group, maybe veterans, maybe police officers, maybe corrections officers, maybe scientists. And if each group advocates for other groups, then you're so much stronger. You're like a rope with braids. And people have got to listen because they think, well, they're not just talking about themselves, their group. They're talking about everybody. Now, he gave that lecture by the banks of the river down there. And I was there. There was a group of active people listening. And what I heard afterwards was, that was a wonderful speech. Nobody paid any attention to it. They went right back to teachers advocating for teachers with no time for anybody else, and police, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's a reason for it. The advocates are paid by their group, and it takes a leap of faith to say, oh, we got to send some of our time building alliance with another group. But Reverend Bartlett is now at Yale. He's trying to teach these things, but the message has to get out that we've got to get past the silos. And he's articulated a very effective way to do it if we only follow him. So thanks for, again, your attention on the science. We maybe have another question. Or maybe the official.
Here from this.
So, I will be at the June 14th contest. I have faith that Linda will have information about the location to everyone who signs up for the wonderful community newsletter, or in the will have program people. But on the topic of Cornell, I want to say a specific action that was taken that could be useful on this alumni weekend. When Trump blocked out the funding for Harvard, their alumni formed a support group, and they are fundraising for a fund that's they call the Presidential Priorities Fund, available for immediate spending without having to go into endowment and only have little $80 a year. A fund for immediate help in this emergency situation for the university. because that blockage of funds has spread today from Harvard, the University of California, and reporting indicates it's going to spread farther. There's a very, very, very good chance that either a full or a much larger blockage could come here. It would be devastating, wreck our economy, etc. So on this one-line weekend, it's called Crimson Courage. You can Google their website, and they are waiting for alumni of other universities to reach out and find out how they can form a support group from their university too. So anyone who goes to the Crimson Courage website will find an email that they can contact about, what it could be like. Because I realized that the full blockage of funds haven't come yet here, but the language that's coming from, a very significant blockage has already come. My husband has had 4 research grants blocked for his own research group. But I expect a much larger blockage is coming, and we are so dependent on our huge synchrotron nanofabrication facility, it could be crippling. And so being ready for some level of support to try to help stiffen the spine maybe, but also provide support in what will be an emergency situation in our town.
Thanks a lot for that. I have been hoping that we would see more alumni activism. I think that it could make a really big difference. And as you point out, there are multiple things that alumni organizers can do. One is fundraising, but it can also be letter writing. It can be petitions. It can be joining with faculty and students and doing this kind of coalition building. I think it's very, very important to do, and as you said, that can also stretch out to doing coalitions among universities. And one of the things that I would like to say to this audience, if you have anything to do with Cornell as a faculty member or an academic professional, or perhaps you're friends with faculty or academic professionals at Cornell, or you're related to some of them, or you are in that position, please join the AAUP. I've talked to faculty who sometimes say, oh, well, I thought if I was a faculty member, I automatically was a member of the American Association of University Professors, the AAUP. No, you gotta join. And it's really easy. All you do is go to aaup.org and you join. You hit join, and there's the sliding scale of dues. And our AAUP chapter has grown in a very impressive way over this past year, I think because we were out early, making clear what our positions were, and then we were brave. We didn't cower, and we were criticizing the university administration for actions that they took that undermined academic freedom, that were punitive against students and faculty. And people come to you when you are out there doing brave, principled things. And then you can also do more organizing. But you gotta support those organizations, right? I mean, if you want universities that thrive and you want academic freedom, it doesn't organize itself and it doesn't pay for itself, right? It's like joining the ACLU to do that kind of great litigation that they're doing. Gotta join. And some people can't afford it, and that's certainly understandable, but others can. And so I think that, there are lots of ways to say, well, what's my job? What am I working in? Can I get together with other people, and can I join organizations in that way? So, and then I think also think about what you're already involved in. Are you involved in some kind of religious institution, some sort of church or synagogue or mosque? Organize people that you know already, right? What are you passionate about? I care about this. This is where I'll really spend the time. Think about, well, can I find organizations that are doing that work? Show up to rallies and talk to the person next to you. Get on a picket line. I've been really inspired by the people who are all over the country on picket lines in front of Tesla. And, they're just tough and really impressive and really clever, and they're great, signs. And then go out to other people's stuff. Like our AFP chapter, we were out there in the UAW 2300 doing this, right? We were on a big line with them. We were at rallies supporting the Cornell Graduate Students United. Because in our view, all of their fights were our fights. And then they come out for us to talk about what you're saying. You know, and it's fun. I mean, that's the other thing. It's really fun to do that work. I think sometimes people think, oh, I gotta really do really hard. It's really fun because you develop relationships. You know, you feel like you're doing something. You're not just depressed. You can go home after that and get depressed, you know, when you do, but while you're together, it's really, it brings out the best in us.
There's always time to be.
I have some thoughts of my own, and then I'd like to hear from you about what we can do. One of my thoughts, and Deborah, thank you for mapping out the financial impacts and off of that, the human impacts. There's not a shortage of money in this state. We have a governor who's been unwilling to tax the rich. There's a fabulous organization that I encourage folks to join. It's called investinOurNewYork.org. And it has mapped out various ways that the state could be raising significant money. We have somebody here from Janet Pellison's office. Assembly Member Pellis has introduced and sponsored some bills that will, again, increase revenues to the state. So that's certainly something that we should be building momentum for. It's one thing, and I love that we come together, and so it's going to be a question to you eventually, I promise. So, I was here, I suspect a lot of you here were here during fracking, and we came together, and the more that we came together, one of the first rallies up in Albany, there were like, what, 12 of us? We had this great big room called The Well, and we pulled out folding chairs and sat down because there just weren't very many of us. But we kept talking and going and spreading information, and it became an enormous movement, and we built our power and showed up and got it done. The next time that I think we had an impact here that really, it was a scary time for all of us, and it wasn't very long ago. It was during COVID. And it impacted us financially and health-wise and in many, many ways. We came together as a community in ways that were really beautiful. And, if there was a silver lining to COVID and to fracking, it's the ways that we figured out to come together and find our power. And to do this. And so I especially want to hear from you guys, and I don't know if Andy Corman's still here. Yeah, there you are. To hear from our legislators about what you did during COVID. And, I had some sense that there was collaboration with Cornell and, the testing stuff. There was, I assume, some law enforcement stuff that went on. And, various pieces all came together. And then the community filled in amazing ways through mutual aid that nobody asked, but we stepped up. And people who could sew started making masks, started making stuff, and all these blue boxes were popping up around town, and people were filling them with food. So when we come together, we figure it out. We are resilient. We have the smarts and the power and the creativity. So I'm not afraid. I know that we've done it before and that we can do it again. But I think COVID was a dress rehearsal, and I'd like to hear what we did in the dress rehearsal that worked, and because we're going to have to do it writ large in the next 4 years. Right, tomorrow.
Who wants to go first? Andy, you did it.
Well,
Sorry, Annie.
Well, she's coming up here. Rich, do you want to start?
I did have just a memory from COVID, and it's quite a strange time, but I'm fortunate to have served as the chair of the Industrial Development Agency for many years and through COVID, and also the Development Corporation, which is the nonprofit arm. And one of the things we did is we created a special grant program to do HVAC systems in daycare centers. Of course, most of you really don't know about this, but we helped get those daycare centers open much faster and much safer, really quickly. And it was, when I leave the legislature at the end of the year, it's one of the things I'm going to be proud of. So, yes.
And how did that come about? How did that start?
I don't know where the initial impetus came from, but once the IDA members had it before them, I was like, this is obvious. This is where we can help. And certainly a lot of the things I think we're going to need to do are going to take money. And what you find when you ever look around the community is that there are little pockets of money in different places. The Development Corporation is not a huge pile, but it had enough. And strategically, it could be used right then when it's needed. So it's a good moment.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Irene. I think, we could debrief, and we have debriefed about COVID, but I think it's time to do that again in a real, you don't have to do it all tonight, but in a real strategic way, see what lessons that we learned, because it was like 99.9% a success in what everybody did, it came together. But just a couple of key things is that when people were very activated what to do, and I would say some of the things that really improved things was groups talking and individuals getting together, but also then making sure you talk to people who really know what the needs are. Because some people thought there were certain needs, but there's elected officials, there's people that work in all these organizations, like the food bank and different agencies that in health, all the different health services. They know what's going on. They're on the ground, youth services. So those people are out there. So even though people are well-meaning, we need to make sure we take a little while to work together. And I would say in the short term, one of the things like you do tonight or tomorrow is reach out to whatever group that's already doing stuff in the community, because they're going to be having difficulty possibly paying their employees. And also they're going to have, in addition, they're going to have, if we're having increased money, they're going to have more need that's in the community. So reach out, and sometimes it might be talking to somebody in that organization, or if you are in one of those organizations, start that safety list, like we talk about safety net, we just have maybe a safety list, people to contact, either before or when you're having these issues come up, so that you can, say, oh, okay, we have this list of potential donors if we need it. We have this list of potential people, volunteers, or whatever it is, or people that can actually provide food. So I think people need to get their safety nets for each organization sooner rather than later. So I could go on, but that's just one of the ideas of some things that really didn't work.
I think that we were actually quite lucky during COVID. We had a state government that was hugely supportive and to the lead. And we had a federal government that was somewhat slow to respond, but eventually won. And we had an enemy that everyone agreed was the enemy. So I think you have to consider that although you could view the pandemic as addressing this, there are important differences. We are now under attack by our federal government. You all know this. And we live in a very blue county, but we still need to remember that there are quite a few people in this county who don't view the federal government as a remedy. I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, But,
Even though we call it that.
yeah. Well, Bob Lynch loves to call me inducibility, but anyway, I think we need to remember that there are important distinctions.
Yeah.
So again, to kind of shift the conversation back to where we started. I hope that everyone here will find some avenue to form alliances. I read a really interesting thing, I think on Facebook of all places, and I think it might have been Stephen King or Michael Moore. Which one was it, Rodney? The thing about singing.
Michael Moore.
It was Michael Moore. So he talked about how when you're in a chorus, everybody breathes at a different time so that nobody realizes that there are just continuous notes in the music. And this is why affiliations and groups is so important, because if you try to do it all yourself, you're gonna be absolutely exhausted. It's not sustainable. We need groups because, when I get tired, Andy can take over. When Andy gets tired, Risa can take over. When Risa gets tired, Rich takes over. That's how this works. And you, as an individual, cannot respond to every damn thing the orange asshole does. And we each need to pick the issues that are important to us, and we individually can respond to those. And we can trust our allies, the other people in our groups, to take care of their issues that they find important. The only thing that's going to save us is us working together. There's a book, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It was like, I think that something like the 10 responsibilities of citizenship. And we've really kind of dropped the ball on a lot of those. How many of you are here tonight because you heard about this from the TCDC? Excellent. So here's what I'm going to suggest, and Linda's going to kill me. Because she's busy with one orange paper right now. So maybe we could wait till July 1st after the primary is over. But we need to start some sort of group where we can communicate with each other directly, and we all can indicate that these are the issues that are important to me. And you can affiliate with people within the group who share your issues, and we can have little subgroups that work on those. And maybe a way to communicate this with each other, maybe through TCDC, I don't know. But honestly, the only way we're going to beat this is if we will all work together. Go ahead.
So I have a question to build on this a bit, and earlier discussions with us, very much appreciated it. There's a sense in which the trust is broken, the system is not functioning, and is likely to not function in the future, and that many of the ideas of what we might do are templated on a functional system.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to understand from some historical perspective wisdom, when do these collective actions become civil disobedience, and basically assume that the system is not going to respond in a manner that we would have been hoping it would with the courts and the government structures. When does it transition? And secondary question is about building urgency beyond the bulk of these us. But yeah, that's it.
When did we cry havoc? Let's slip the dogs of war? I don't know. But I think it's in the back of all our minds. When do you just say there isn't hope here? I don't think we're there yet. I think there's steps we can take to certainly test how far along we are. And even though you're not going to necessarily get good faith from the current administration, you know, I made this point in my comments that we've kind of been given a roadmap, that there's a list of governments all over the country that agree with us. And the typical, say, on the county level, there's the New York State Association of Counties, and either NACO, National Association of Counties, you even get that. But we belong to both, but you're gonna have counties that agree and disagree, right? The country's split. But we've kind of been given a gift in that we have a list, whether accurate or not, but pretty accurate. If we could give the organization to say, these are the specific demands we want our federal government to attend to. We do not want enforcement actions against US citizens, against foreign nationals for their political speech. We don't want an emphasis on people who just overstayed visas. We go ahead and enforce against people who've committed real crimes. And we want immigration reform. If you could have a quarter of the governments all at once saying the same thing, saying, hey, Congress, do this, right? Well, they you know, they at least have to talk about it. That conversation isn't even happening yet, but it could. And with the appropriate organization of all the people that are really angry right now, I think it's pretty feasible. And I think we go there before we get to the end times. I don't want to go to the end.
I think that one of the issues we need to be mindful of is that we don't want to slip into civil disobedience, because I think what I fear is that if things go south and it starts to look like violent civil disobedience, this administration is very likely to declare a state of emergency, and then everything is really gonna go tits up. Yeah, so that's one concern, and we have to walk that line very carefully.
Let me add something. I'm based in the heart of DC, and on June 14th, the birthday boy, Donald Trump, is having a dictator-style military parade, even though he's draft dodging, and it's going to be tanks, military marching down Pennsylvania Avenue to celebrate his birthday in a true dictator style. To get to a couple of the points previously raised, people aligned with it are very aware of things like the Reichstag fire and the role of agent provocateurs who seem like they're part of the protest movement, but create violence that's then used, as in Germany or elsewhere, to crack down with these kind of emergency rules. And one of the problems that some of us deeper investigators have found among Democrats is a failure to vet our representatives and really understand their background. And I'll use as an example RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, but there's many more that seem like they offer some fresh voice, but actually can be then flipped. There's a Linda Lie that some of you may be familiar with, and or Linda Lee, I think her name was. But these people become ascendant because they have certain progressive buzzwords, but their true function is to work for the Trump and again apparatus. So we've got to be very careful about marches with people involved who may create disorder. And I'll just say that I saw this personally during the last stages of the Trump administration, when obviously they had an insurrection taking charge of the Capitol. Streets around me were blocked off with wires, military, and all of this. We had the Proud Boys. I was covering the trial of Proud Boys in the federal courthouse. Roger Stone and his group and people, and they have an almost demonic hatred of what most people in this group are advocating, and they're very knowledgeable, they're very well funded in disrupting it. And in terms of elections, and why I'm so glad that the County Democratic Party is here at the table, the ultimate force is not just voting. One of the attendees said, "What vote? What more can we do?" Well, it needs to be activism throughout, because these people are well trained on how to disrupt elections, particularly in blue areas, so that a lot of votes in cities are not going to be counted and so forth. And it has to be registered and year-round activism and reaching out to groups, because I can tell you, the other side has this playbook down, and now they're in charge. And these Proud Boys, these oath keepers, these insurrectionists are heroes out there. Many of them are armed. They're going to voting places, particularly in Georgia, but elsewhere in the country. And they've got guns. And they're there to intimidate voters. So it has to be overwhelming, not just you voting and your family. It's got to be overwhelming.
And I can say one more thing about voting. I've noticed that we all get really excited when it's a federal election year. You know, we all show up for the Senate races, we all show up for the House races, we show up for the presidential election in big numbers. But local elections just don't seem to register with voters. I don't know how to convince people that your local elections, your local municipal electeds have way more influence on your day-to-day life than the people in Washington. So a good start is to become more active locally, and not just voting, but run for office.
And can we include the school election?
Yes. School board elections, yes. Yes, Jeannie, for sure.
Just add something, sure. I think that we should do all the things that people are talking about in response to the question, at the same time that we recognize that what we have is a lawless, corrupt government in the White House, and and now with all of the appointments in various agencies. And so following the law is going to quickly become something where there will be some very real moral, ethical choices about what we do. And certainly in terms of like the sanctuary issues, we're right there, right? There is a choice, and at this point it's still not unlawful, right, for the local police to refuse to help, ICE agents and immigration enforcement at the federal level. But it may be unlawful to do that at some point. And so at certain points, there may be choices where resistance is also refusing to follow unethical, unconstitutional, lawless sorts of laws, right? And again, we can look at Nazi Germany, it's changed. And so this is why I think it's so crucial for us to do the kind of organizing now and think very carefully about what are our strategies, our goals, and what tactics will get us there.
And how much are we individually willing to lose?
Right, and that was the next thing I was going to say. There you go, which is the issue of risk, right? I mean, I've noticed on campus that over time, people have lost the sense of putting themselves out, for doing something that might be considered, well, your dean won't like it, or your chair won't like it, or your senior colleagues won't like it. That there seems to be this view that has occurred of, well, the only thing that I'll do, which is perhaps political, is if I have no risk involved. And so we all have to assess our risk levels. I'm not big on self-sacrifice. I think we have to assess our risk levels, join together, talk carefully about who risks what and who can take it. So for example, I speak out on a lot of things because I'm in a more secure position than a lot of my colleagues, because I can take the hit. Right? I will speak about Palestinian rights for the last name my neighbor is, because I can take the hit. And I believe it. Right? And so I don't expect people who have more risk to do exactly what I do, and I expect people who have less risk than I do to respond more. And that's, for example, the boards of trustees of universities like Cornell, the administration. They should be speaking out and organizing with us. So I think we have to think about risk and what we do very carefully, but not assume that there won't be risk involved.
Cynthia, you have.
Yeah, just a hey, so I'm the first vice chair, my Democratic committee, working with that, and Amy Foreman's in our committee, this is Democratic committee chair, and he said to us like last month that other countries have gone through this too, and how did they get in there, work together, this book's about it, actually, my family has Polish origins, people work together, and we have to take care of each other. And, like, it's going to be really go with that program where people are going to get rides. We're going to have a community like that. In the meantime, until this is over, not to give up, but that's what can happen in the meantime. And it's
what other people have done and stuff.
Yeah. Well, George, you had a question.
Appreciate the whole concept of getting together and cooperating. We're under attack.
Yes. It's a war.
People are being kidnapped by ICE. I don't pretend to understand how dangerous it is, but I don't think we can eliminate the thought of physical resistance. John Lewis didn't stay home from the Independence Bridge because he knew the conversation going. And he was out there. You have to fight these motherfuckers. And next time I don't talk to this town, I hope we find out about it. And if they try to pick somebody up, we don't go there looking for a fight, we go there and say, you can't do this. And make it physical, they've got to do it physically.
But you've got to have an alliance, you got to have a group and alliance, like I said, not afraid of yourself. It's not.
No, I'm not afraid of myself.
Yeah, we'll send it over to.
They have guns.
So what? So what the fuck?
The hooligans don't mind using guns.
So you stay home, watch television?
No, I'm not saying that. Here's what I would say, is to have permeated among people who sympathize with what you're saying, what we're all saying, that this is a knife fight, and we can't wear boxing gloves, because we got to remember that some of the people in the audience, the insurrectionists, have guns, they're willing to use them. And so brave, heroic acts are used partly because they control the media, which I was part of for many years. And so isolated acts of heroism
if you use physical resistance, peaceful physical resistance, and they're stupid enough to shoot, then you are gonna make so much progress in this.
Alan, I would just say, as somebody who's been in and about the media for over 50 years, that many of these initially heroic acts are twisted to be totally counter to the views of the people who fostered them. And maybe afterwards we could talk about examples. But very few people in the general public have the ability to sort through the true motives of heroic citizens versus what they're seeing.
I wouldn't use the word heroic. I would use the word
Idealistic, whatever. But
Well, we can argue about this all night, but I think this eventually circles back to the point. Every one of us needs to assess our own level of risk tolerance. And for some of us, maybe taking that physical step of opposing an ICE being to thugs, that's just not for everyone. I guess that's where we end up, but it is the rights movement. Yeah, so.
Can I also just add that it's also building democratic organizations, right? I mean, this is why organizing, having strong organizations and having them democratic, so that people can truly discuss, what are the options that we have, and do they serve our goals? Do some serve their goals better than others? Are there ways in which we can avoid arrests, if you can, if we can't, who's willing to do it? I mean, these are very complex decisions, right? Just, saying, well, we should go out and do X. It's not going to be the sort of careful planning that we need to do. And I think that also, as people have pointed out, having local institutions where we have a responsive government and governmental bodies locally, state level, and if possible, getting some more people at the federal level, will also mean that we can make demands on the government through our organizations that they should respond more. And I really wanted to emphasize what Jeannie had raised about the school boards, because this is an example of the right wing in the long game. They took over school boards in state after state, and they controlled the books and what people need. Exactly, and it's a really good example of being the wheel from a progressive standpoint and saying, we really do need to do the work.
Okay, we have three people with been patiently raising their hands. We have Smart, we have the gentleman with the racy hat, and we have Joe Wetmore. So let's start, and the lady in the back. So let's start with Bree.
I can't hear from the person who you think who would have her family.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Never lost, I think it's great. There are also two wonderful cases like that. Maybe there's all has protests every week. There. I refuse to be scared of I just think all needs courage. You stand up for a goddamn country and for the immigrants and it's happening here. It's disgusting. And we just have to, I'm not ever going to agree. But Charlie, thank you for your courage.
Yeah.
People in Selma, Alabama, you say that coward, I don't know, they're going to get me again. This is our country that we're fighting for. This is our, and anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
You have enough to say.
the money.
Bring the money here.
Don't take care of it, okay?
What is the, no, they can't be funded.
Just technically.
We want to thank everybody for their presentations and for organizing this. Maybe pick up on what this person has just said. I have a sense of frustration. We started the evening with both of them, but it moved on to a positive action, a movement that started with a speech by Abraham Lincoln, and a movement that changed the world. I'm into movement. I don't think you really need to worry about Tompkins County and what we're doing. We need more participation in local government and elections. I think media is the lack of a real daily local newspaper is part of the problem. But I think we're all on the same page here. And it isn't a matter, we're speaking to the choir, essentially. How do
We need the choir to all sing together on the same page.
Well, how do we build the movement to spread, it sounds very ambitious, but we need a movement, a national movement that, that helps people to understand what's happening. I mean, it is an existential threat. Term that's used, but how do we're all pretty well informed, how do we carry that to other regions, other people outside our county, where we are well educated, well informed, we know what's happening? What do we do? I have a sense of frustration and
But there are groups, MoveOn.org is nationwide, they start there in 2016, it's on the paper of the desk. Citizen action is nationwide, you know, and indivisible. So they're there, this young people are active, they're there, they're on it, they're active. So that's what's happening. It is happening. It's still in its infancy. A generation forgot how to be active, so how to act in a So we're doing it. It's happening.
But I think he's also talking about reaching costs to the people that aren't, that aren't on the same side, what we do is not on the same side.
And I might ask what's happening in, where are the students?
They're all bad.
Well, actually, in terms of that question, I think this is one example of why we have to demand from our institutions that they act in a supportive, responsive way to support, to enable, just to talk about Cornell right now, and this is true at other places, to enable faculty, staff, and students to have freedom of expression. So what did Cornell do? And what has it done? It has responded to protests, peaceful protests by students who were out there talking about Palestinian rights, talking about Palestinian rights, by suspending students, not allowing them on campus, by adopting a new expressive activity policy, which I call the new repressive activity policy, to make sure that there's order, disproportionate discipline for people just for heckling. I mean, it is a very repressive response that we've gotten from the administration. The students have been out there, they have been protesting, and they have been slammed by the Cornell administration. And this is where the kind of coalition building that we've been doing is so important, because we have pushed back, but we're pushing back against an extremely powerful organization with donors who are powerful, with boards of trustees who are from the corporate world. And so we have to recognize, I think, also that this didn't happen overnight, that the kind of corporatized university and this sort of attention to law and order, quotes there on the campus, has come about over time, particularly since Reagan, right? So we're not only pushing back here against the Trump administration, who are outright fascists, but also against these this corporate control and top-down undemocratic governance of the university.
The Vision
That's
University. The Vision University.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're trying to save the soul of higher ed. And the students have been out there, so, you know.
Okay, let me, I know we've got a couple of points. Let me make a couple of points as someone who's done a lot of the outreach for this that hasn't proven so far effective, aside from what the county Democratic Party has done. But the way I look on the outreach to young people, community groups that I've, and the media that I've undertaken for this event is not so much failure, but looking at it as seeds planted, and to pick up on one of Reese's points before, looked at them in the right way, it's actually gratifying to have the apathy, the rejection, and think, well, why is that? And how can it be overcome next time? So let me give a couple of examples. One, even though I made my business to meet the head of Gannett newspapers nationwide, Mike Reed, and talk to him about their emphasis on local media. This was a month ago. They're speaking in Washington, and I talked about this event. And we've written many notes to the Ithaca Journal. Totally no response, except the two top editors wrote back that they don't work there anymore.
Yeah.
And I reached out to them in their private addresses, which as an investigative reporter, read a little look at it, and invite them here. Well, one's in New Jersey, the other's not here. But you can repeat that story through 10 or 12 media that I approached, including where I used to work at Cornell Sun. And oh, I'm getting to that. So, but as she would point out, only part the Ithaca Sun, here on behalf of the Ithaca Voice, which early Deborah said, the Ithaca Voice, they covers. And so all of these, and I'm going to the Cornell Sun reunion tomorrow in Lotus, right? Two separate things. And I don't quite know how I'll react, because I've written at least 10 letters. I gotta find out which one I brought forth. But a bit of apathy is the roadmap on the letters to success. Now, let me just talk briefly about some of the community groups. Because this is Tompkins County, it's not just Cornell. Reached out to Ithaca student newspaper, they were nice.
I see.
I see, but they're out for the summer, so they responded. They're out for the summer. But I used to box at the South Side Community Center. My coach, he's passed away. I was trying to get him involved in Leverage GIDC, which is named its entire boxing program after the coach that I worked with for years at the South Side Center and all around upstate New York. They're too busy, are not involved. And here's the suspicion, maybe they think this is for elite people.
Well, or maybe they think, do you see any people of color in the street?
Yeah, whatever. I mean,
Yes.
I wrote multiple letters to them and saying, look, we can go there and talk to the kids. We'll hire some of the kids to help you. We can talk to them about job training. We can talk to the seniors about the boxers of the old days. And one little response wrote to the church and so forth. But all of these things are, they're obstacles to be overcome next time, not to sit in judgment, maybe I shouldn't even mention this, but I'm just saying, if we go into these situations with what I think Risa was saying, a joyful, expansive attitude, it's actually very interesting and arguably fun to bring in new people. So,
Okay. All right. So in a way, Beth, why don't you come up and use the microphone?
I'm pretty loud. I think going back to this issue of the risk that we're going to take, because I'm right here, and people saying, you know, what are we supposed to be doing? I join Indivisible. I go to the weekly hop and rave down by Redlands, and I stand in this, and it helps me. I make eye contact with people in the car. They're holding this song. Some people are honking, you know, some people are doing something, but my husband makes fun of me endlessly for doing this, but I feel like, because even when a person, you can see people hesitating, they're gonna beat their horn, and it's like a first action. For me to stand there is a first action.
Yes.
For me to go to the rallies is a first action. You have to get ready. I think it's a warm-up act for when we all need to turn out.
Yes.
And I wasn't brave enough. So when I went down to Washington, D.C. on April 6th, my goggles and I had masks because I really thought there's a chance that we would get sprayed with tear gas to make a riot, that then there would be martial law and all these fears we have, right? Not only would I get hit with tear gas, which didn't sound good, but then it could be used to your point that this kind of violence, if violence breaks out, can be used against us. And then you have martial law, and emergency, you know, post and from whatever the heck. So I think this is a risk every time, this dilemma, and I don't really know how to face it. So June 14th is the No Cheese protest rally. It's on Washington Park in Ithaca. I think you can also go. There's one. Portland, like all over the country.
Where is the one in Ithaca?
It's just Washington. It's just Washington Park. It's by 4th Street.
By 4th Street? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's just through there. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to say, there is this risk that somebody is going to do something violent. But I just see it as all over the country, these small protests have been happening everywhere. And it gets harder and harder for there to be the tear gas martial law thing when they've been building. So I think we all need to show up for these, even though you're uncomfortable or I'm uncomfortable. Usually harder for me to stand out there with my sign and to make eye contact with people. But I feel like I'm doing something and I am contacting with people. And I think it's just our presence to show that we are here. And I think if we just work in our communities and we're just behind the scenes, that's all good. But I think I'm agreeing. I think we're reaching a new point of danger. When is the end game coming? We need to be ready. So I just, do you think which one outweighs, you know, the risk that we're willing to take? And I've decided I'm older, I don't want my kids to have to be in the front line. I don't want other kids to be in the front line. I do wish college students, they were vocal about gossip, but there hasn't been anything on Cornell campus that I'm aware of that students are just like, you know, stop the fascists, take over. I don't know what's happening. They seem like they spend all the gas. But anyway, if anybody has an idea, should we be worried? How do we speak nonviolent? What do we do? How do we get the training? Indivisible has run one training workshop. It's an all-day affair to teach people a nonviolent response. And maybe we need to have more of these that we can all tap into.
Well, can I just say, and this goes back to like 1970 or 69. Andy and I were down in DC. It was an anti-war demonstration. Yeah, and there was a large group from Cornell that included a lot of what I at the time thought was really old people who were going down there to the nonviolent civil disobedience, and they were doing a sit-in, and Metropolitan Police had parked a line of buses back to front, all the way around Wings. And people were sitting in there. And it was all going just great until some yahoos came through and started throwing bottles, throwing rocks, and screaming and yelling, and the fit hit the fan. And those poor folks that were down there with all that training, doing nonviolent civil disobedience, got creamed. I will say from that experience, the tear gas isn't that bad. But yeah, you can try to keep it not violent, but it feeds back into Andy's point about the agent provocateurs. I mean, if somebody wants to have it all go tits up, it will go tits up. And you just have to be prepared for that.
I think it's reasonably safe and effective what you're doing. Let me add one other thing before you get to the next questions. I mentioned early on that I was head of a trade association. Someone called it lobbying. We would call it advocacy for better government. But here's what professional lobbyists and others who want to be effective when elected people do. Maybe the actual elected people might contradict me. But there's a 3-point plan, I think. That one, you got to represent a group of at least some constituents. And you come in with a request for specific action. And you only spend a third of your time talking about what the reasons are for your action. You spend the next 2/3 of the time finding out whether the elected representative can support you on that or not. And if not, how can your group, not you individually, not moralistic ideas, how can your group bring the elected representative to do definable actions? And here's just one last thing, Congressman Riley. So I went to his office last week to try to encourage his participation. And what do I see in my house? Scanning office building. He's right across the hall from Dr. Phil Happy Lonnie Jackson, the demented congressman from Texas who was handing out all these bills and the Trump White House and has gone off his rocker. And right around the corner, maybe 40 feet from Congressman Riley's office, is a list of federal judges wanted. And it's Andy Agnes from disgracing name. Andy is, let's try to avoid it. But he wants to go after these federal judges. He wants MAGA to go after these federal judges. Similar voting, Trump appointees, because they ruled against Trump. And even though he's from Nashville, Tennessee has been gerrymandered so that all national districts are Republican, because they don't want anyone who's not a MAGA Republican to represent Tennessee, except Stephen Cohen over in Memphis. And so this is the environment that your congressman works in, surrounded by Andy Agnes and Ronnie Jackson. And so you need to come in with definable goals with your group and ask, how can we work together? Now, we have other questions, but maybe the elected people.
Let's move on. Because it's getting late, and I'm sure your patience is tried. We still have a couple of questions.
My name is Fred Balfour, and I've been on it 15 years or so. I had the upper of Linda Hoffman's Mary Beth and Bill Wilson. The thing that turned my blood cold tonight, Beverly, I think we said, that PCAT, some representative, got message, letter, whatever,
Yeah.
from the Secretary of petition
Yeah, shut it up.
saying, if you guys start screwing around and not living with ICE and not living with us, and you're staying in a sanctuary city, you're in trouble.
Mhm.
And you mentioned it in terms of money. And I think there's other things I would worry about as well. But I like to get that more specific on that, maybe a copy of the letter, because I
It's on the website.
our, website means,
What is your?
Tompkins, Tompkins Hall, there's all these documents, reps to, Tompkins County are on the website.
Tompkins County.
It's a private, it's a privately created site for this.
What's it going?
Tompkins, Town Hall, now.
So, I am a member of the Unitarian Church. And when you start to talk about sanctuary, you literally possibly activate people's brains a little bit in what a church. I was here, soon enough to meet Martha Berger, and we're supposed to be her, so I can do my, water. She stood up in the church, 12 years ago, 10 years ago, back when the, Senate of the Lake was about to be elevated with, cubic feet of growing gas, and she stood up and apologized to the church. She said, I got arrested, nothing found for Martha, 60 years. And, my choices are pay $300 to go to jail for a week. And I'm really sorry. I think she was 89.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna pay the $300 to jail for a week. I used to do it, but I don't think so. I'm curious though about why comments tonight haven't included local churches, local faith-based organizations, because you have, you know, we think more about how to get in Washington and how faith-based organizations respond to things like sanctuary and actually holding. And also, it's interesting because they also, too, with every churches across. I was born a couple of weeks after Frank Roosevelt gave his third inaugural. I'm just in every church I've been in has had a very active communication system, email, whatever. And we have these kind of islands of churches do this kind of thing. There's some community, but if we want to think about organizing the community, I think we should think about maybe how would we tap into those? How would we get into these area churches together? And do we need to really watch and see when they're SUVs with smoky windows come by and I don't know. Seems to me we can do some things that's in local organizations. So I'd like to really start this. In a situation where I can't work real hard on it because of some complications with my family, but I knew that it's important to bring it in. I happen to be outgoing president of the board of the church, so that means almost nothing in Unitarian church. But anyway,
That's a helpful suggestion.
I think that would be an interesting way to start thinking about it. This is not a six-month problem.
No.
And I think if we started thinking something there, I love your idea about different communities around the country. That seems to me to be real stuff that has some all groups working together. What the hell about? And
Well, I don't want to just pay attention. If I may. When you're talking about a sanctuary city, the city of Ithaca is a sanctuary city for abortion. Okay, that's one of my places I spend my activist role in. It is also at a time gone by prior to when Roe versus Wade actually came forward. There was a group of churches in upstate New York clergy that came together and formed a group that worked with Connie, who was a Republican in the state legislature, Connie Cook. So there is that thin history, and the probability can happen again on many different levels. But there were churches here in upstate New York, clergy, there were priests, and there were nuns. And it was happening downstate as well. Maybe we can pick up that idea, Fred, that you just shared, and bring churches together in our particular community. Okay. Also, I wanted, while the time is here, the rally for No Kings is in Washington Park. It's on West Court Street. Just so you know, if you go to Mobilize, you can sign up for it. They like to know tentatively how many people are going to be showing. It's your court in
Washington.
yeah.
We're not behind.
Sorry,
What's the time to start?
good question. Let me go. I'm already signed up. The time is from 1 to 3 p.m. Again, the date is June 14th. Okay. Near Court in Corn Street, you know where Corn. It's the Washington Park. Yeah, it's right there. Yeah, Park Street. Just Google on your phone and it pulls up a little map and it shows you exactly where it's located. It wasn't clear. Right. But thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, by popular demand, Joestown. I always like it to have our county representatives take a statement to our community, our representatives, saying we want to uphold the rule of law. We object to our civil liberties issue about that. And it's important. And there's people who have sworn to uphold the Constitution. We reject the process they should die because of people in our community. We object to freedom of speech being commented in our community. We object to the fact that the politics are not being get their decisions not being involved. Make a statement for our community.
I agree, and we did.
Okay, we got
1 meeting ago,
2 meetings ago.
one before that.
We can like that.
You've all been incredibly patient and really appreciate it. Thank you.